Chapter 1, September 15, 1835. Landfall at the Enchanted Isles. September 15, 1835, near dawn. I stood upon the Beagle's deck as the Pacific lay dark and breathing beneath us. Ahead, the Galápagos rose only as a black horizon, not yet land, but a suspicion. No church bell, field, or woodland greeted the eye, only vapor and volcanic shadow. I felt, before setting foot ashore, that these islands would not easily explain themselves. By 8 o'clock on September 15th, Captain Fitzroy had the Beagle's position worked with admirable exactness. His officers bent over chart, compass, and chronometer, as if uncertainty itself could be ruled in ink. I envied that discipline. Latitude and longitude gave these islands a place upon the globe, yet none of my instruments could tell me what manner of life waited there, or why this shore already troubled my mind. Toward mid-morning, the haze thinned, and the coast showed itself in teeth, black lava ridges, broken cones, and cliffs burnt into shapes no gentle country would own. The sun struck them handsomely, yet I could not call them welcoming. They seemed lately lifted from the furnace, scarcely cooled, without softness or mercy. Still, along that forbidding edge, something moved. The dead-looking rock was not dead at all. I resolved, before anchor or landing boat, to make my notebook answerable to particulars. September 15, 1835. The hour when seen, the shore approached, the bird, shell, plant or stone taken, and, no less, the doubt attached to each. I did not suppose these entries would someday carry much weight. They were only my hedge against confusion, while the islands waited ahead with their evidence still sealed. Before noon on September 15, 1835, while the Beagle worked nearer the Galápagos shore, the men traded reports with the relish sailors give to marvels. They spoke of tortoises large enough to burden a path like moving stones, birds so unwary they might be knocked aside, and black lizards haunting the surf. I wrote none of it as fact, yet each rumor had the order of evidence, and demanded land beneath my boots. By noon, northward cloud lay like a closed door beyond the Beagle's intended work. I knew only the islands charted before us, and the duties Captain Fitzroy meant to prosecute. Yet somewhere past that bright empty water stood a remote rock I should not see, nor tread, nor collect from. In a later age it would bear my name. On September 15, 1835, it remained only absence, waiting beyond the margin. After sunset, September 15, 1835, I sat below the Beagle's deck with a lantern trembling over my journal. The ship creaked softly, and beyond the planks the black Pacific concealed every footprint, shell, claw, and wing that morning might expose. I felt no revelation, only a pressure in the dark. If species were fixed as we had been taught, why did these islands seem already to be withholding an argument? Thus I entered, in my own mind, into a compact with these islands. Chatham might offer one token, Charles another, Albemarle a harsher third. Each would first appear merely local, a peculiarity of lava, drought, shell, beak, or habit. Yet I suspected the danger lay in their company. A clue alone may be dismissed. A chain of clues, dated and placed, may pull a man far beyond his voyage. Chapter 2, September 16, 1835. San Cristobal begins the puzzle. At about 9 o'clock on the morning of September 16, 1835, I stepped ashore on Chatham Island, now called San Cristobal, and felt the land answer through my boots with stored heat. The beach gave way to broken black lava, sharp as slag from a furnace. This was no ancient softened country. It seemed scarcely finished, a young volcanic floor still hostile to the foot, yet already keeping its secrets. At midday on September 16, 1835, Chatham appeared almost lifeless. The sun stood overhead like a weight, bleaching the scrub and drawing a mineral smell from the lava. No meadow softened the island, no stream relieved it, even the thorny plants seemed rationed by some severe hand. Yet in that dryness I began to notice design of a rougher sort, leaves small, loosements cautious, life economizing itself against thirst. By the early afternoon of September 16th, on Chatham's dry lava plain, several small birds came so near that I might almost have touched them with my hand. They hopped among the stones with bright, unworried eyes, as if no creature had taught them fear of man. Their confidence delighted me for an instant, then disturbed me. Innocence so complete was not merely pretty, it was information, and I did not yet know how to read it. Toward 3 o'clock, while the surf beat upon Chatham's black shore, a sailor spoke of lizards that went willingly into the sea. I first took it for one of those forecastle exaggerations born of heat and idleness. Yet the men insisted, dark reptiles, ugly as cooled lava, slipping from rock into breakers like creatures with business below. A land animal entering salt water unsettled me more than any rumor of size. Later that afternoon, September 16, 1835, on Chatham Island, I found the creature before I saw it. Across the dust and cinders ran broad sunken paths, as if small carts had passed where no cart could go. Low branches were torn, cactus pads bitten clean, the scrub pressed aside by a heavy patient body. Something immense had written itself upon the ground, and the empty tracks seemed to watch me. By 4 o'clock I had turned from tracks to evidence I could carry. Into paper, tin, and spirits went insects, plants, and little birds, each with a hurried mark, Chatham, September 16, 1835. I believed the island name sufficient, yet my hands were less exact than my curiosity. Some birds lay together too carelessly. A label seemed a small thing then, later it would become the lock on the whole mystery. Near sunset, as the heat left the lava, I heard a remark from men acquainted with these islands that a tortoise's shell might betray which island had bred it. One saddle-backed, another domed, so they claimed, as plainly as a sailor knows a flag. I wrote the notion down, but held it at arm's length. A shell was a shell, surely, yet the sentence remained hard and dark, like lava cooling in my pocket. At dusk on September 16, 1835, Chatham Island would not arrange itself into any comfortable order. The birds were birds, yet too trusting. The reptiles were reptiles, yet rumored to belong partly to the sea. The tortoise was familiar in outline, yet perhaps marked by its island. I stood above the darkening shore and felt the question sharpen. Why did life here resemble the known world, while quietly contradicting it? Chapter 3, September 17, 1835, Volcanic Evidence Underfoot. At 6:30 on the morning of September 17, 1835, I climbed Chatham's black cinder slope while the Beagle lay pale below. Each step sank with a dry whisper. The ground looked ancient as a ruined furnace, yet spoke of recent fire, sharp scoria, glassy fragments, slopes not softened by long weather. Beauty stood here under punishment. If the rocks were young, what of the creatures forced to endure them? By 7 o'clock, September 17th, I reached the rim of a broken crater on Chatham Island and looked down into a bowl of ash and burnt stone. Below it, old lava had run in frozen rivers toward the sea, wrinkled, black, and cruel to the boot. This was no garden flung into the tropics. It was land hammered out by fire, then left to ask what life could possibly remain. A little after 7, I knelt where pale stems had thrust themselves through the ash, as if the island allowed life only by grudging exception. Here was no generous soil, only dust, salt wind, and stones still sharp from fire. Yet these meager plants stood, not triumphant, but admitted after a stern trial. I wondered what unseen rule spared one seed and denied another beneath this beautiful, pitiless sky. Near 8 o'clock on September the 17th, upon Chatham's lava, the stones themselves seemed to stir. Small lizards lay pressed flat against the black rock, their skins so close in color to the burnt surface that my eye found them only when they moved. They did not possess the island merely by being here. They matched it, belly to heat, claw to stone, stillness to concealment. The ground had shaped a question with a living body. By 8:30, the word tropic seemed almost a jest. I had expected dripping leaves, loud forests, some prodigal green abundance beneath the equatorial sun. Instead, Chatham offered clinker, thorn, dust, and a heat that emptied the mouth. And still the creatures remained, lizard, bird, tortoise track, each persisting where comfort had never been promised. Their presence grew stranger than any luxuriance. Life here was not welcomed. It had negotiated terms. At 9 o'clock, with ash gritting between the pages, I wrote less boldly than I had walked. Chatham Island would not yield its meaning merely because I demanded one. I set down, uncertain, perhaps, requires comparison. Such words looked frail beside lava and bone, yet they were instruments as necessary as hammer or lens. Doubt, honestly preserved, might keep the evidence alive until my mind was fit to receive it. From a low rise before 10, September 17th, I looked from Chatham across the hard blue channels dividing these volcanic lands. The water did not appear wide to a sailor, yet to a lizard, a tortoise, a seed, it might be a wall more absolute than stone. If each island held its creatures apart, then each might keep its own history. The sea itself began to look less like passage than prohibition. Shortly after 10 on September 17, 1835, I closed my notebook on Chatham Island with no triumph in me. Lava, drought, tameness, tracks, and separating seas had arranged themselves like pieces of an argument, yet I could not read the sentence. Something in these islands seemed to bind place to creature more closely than I had been taught. I felt the edge of a clue, but possessed no theory to name it. Chapter 4, September 18, 1835. Giant tortoises as living maps. Near midday on September 18, 1835, on Chatham Island, the track at last became an animal. A great tortoise stood before me, high on its ponderous legs, its head lifted with the gravity of an elder magistrate. It did not hurry, indeed, it seemed incapable of acknowledging haste. The shell was not merely armor, but a little island carried upon the back, binding the creature to this dry volcanic world. By 12:30, September 18th, I heard the sailors laugh over an old island practice. A man might climb upon a tortoise's shell and be borne a few slow yards, as upon some living stool. I watched one such trial with curiosity, then discomfort. The beast endured us without protest, but endurance is not consent. In that patient burden I saw not sport, but our habit of mistaking silence for permission. At 1 o'clock, September 18th, 1835, on Chatham's parched ground, I followed several tortoises away from the scorched flats. Their feet had pressed a road through ash, cactus, and brittle scrub, all tending toward the hidden promise of water. No compass guided them, yet the islands seemed remembered in their bodies. Where I saw barrenness, they knew a route. Their slow procession drew survival upon the lava. Toward 2 o'clock that same afternoon, September 18th, 1835, the rumor returned with sharper teeth. Men acquainted with these islands insisted that a tortoise's shell could betray its home, one form from this island, another from that, as plainly as a sailor reads a flag. I wrote it down, not as fact, but as provocation. Could bone and horn carry the signature of geography? The thought would not lie still. At 20 minutes past 2, I examined the nearest tortoise as one might examine a coastal chart. The raised front of its shell, the long reach of its neck, the set of its limbs, all seemed fitted to some particular bargain with cactus, stone, and thirst. If neighboring islands truly stamped such differences upon their tortoises, then geography was not background. It was written into the creature itself. By 3 o'clock, September 18th, the practical business of shipboard life intruded. The crew valued these great tortoises as fresh meat, easily kept alive aboard HMS Beagle until wanted. I could not deny the sailor's hunger, nor the voyage's hard economy. Yet each animal carried more than flesh. When one was taken for the galley, I felt a page torn from an island book before I had learned its alphabet. Near 3:30, I watched one survivor advance scarcely a yard, while our men hurried, shouted, measured, and packed the afternoon away. HMS Beagle counted hours by bells and watches, the tortoise counted by thirst, cactus growth, seasons of rain, and perhaps by older fires cooled into rock beneath its feet. My expedition seemed suddenly brief. Against that deliberate body, human time flickered like a match on black lava. At 4 o'clock, with the sun lowering over San Cristobal's lava and the sea bright between neighboring shores, I turned the shell question over in my mind. These islands lay near enough for the eye to compare them, yet the animals seemed to answer each place separately. If this rumor proved true, it was no small curiosity of form. It was a summons. Why should neighboring islands produce different bodies? Chapter 5, September 19, 1835. The Fearless and the Fitted. September 19th, near 8 in the morning, I walked inland from the dry shore of San Cristobal with my gun lowered. Small birds hopped within arm's length, bright-eyed and absurdly trusting, as if man were no danger and fear had never been taught here. Their gentleness first amused me, then it chilled me. On islands so cut off by sea, perhaps the absence of enemies had shaped even courage into habit. By 9 o'clock that same morning, September 19th, 1835, the island's quiet grew less comforting. A bird settled on a thorn branch and regarded me without alarm. A lizard held its place on warm lava as my shadow crossed it. Such trust was not innocence, I began to think, but testimony. These creatures behaved as if their ancestors had kept a long record of who hunted here and who had never come. Toward 10 o'clock, among the pale scrub of San Cristobal, I took particular notice of several mockingbirds, gray, quick, plain creatures, hardly grand enough to stop a voyage. Yet their bills, markings, and manner asked to be written down with care. I could not say why they troubled me. They seemed ordinary until I imagined another island holding birds almost the same, but not quite. A little before 11 on September 19th, 1835, still on San Cristobal, I gathered several small finch-like birds from the scrub and lava edge. They seemed modest beside the tortoise paths and the stranger mockingbirds, their beaks varying in ways I noted but did not comprehend. I placed them among my specimens as useful birds, not revelations. Only the island kept its silence, as if withholding the meaning of these plain little bodies. Near midday, September 19th, I returned to my packets and tags with uneasy diligence. San Cristobal, Chatham, this cove, that scrub, the hour, the bird, each name seemed a small nail holding fact to place. Yet already my hands had been too casual with certain little birds. If an island altered life by degrees, then a misplaced label might one day hide the very proof I sought without knowing it. After the labels were secured, I descended over rough lava toward the surf, where the noon light flashed hard upon the black stones. At first I thought the rocks themselves were moving. Then heads lifted, claws gripped, and dark iguanas lay watching the sea as if it belonged to them. A reptile at the water's edge seemed a contradiction waiting to be tested, and I felt the day sharpen around it. By evening, September 19th, 1835, my table aboard the Beagle held no single answer, only an inventory of disturbances. Lava, young, black, and cruel underfoot. Shells, rumored to betray their island. Birds, tame beyond prudence. Small birds, varied, yet still mute to me. Tracks, heavy sentences crossing dust. Sea barriers, blue walls between near worlds. San Cristobal had given me pieces, and every piece resisted being put away. At 6:30 that night, September 19th, 1835, San Cristobal darkened astern, while HMS Beagle made ready for another passage. I had stepped ashore expecting curiosities. I left with uneasiness packed among skins, notes, and stones. The island had not answered me. It had multiplied the question. Somewhere beyond the black water, another shore waited, and I feared it might resemble this one, only enough to prove it different. Chapter 6, September 2022, 1835, Between Islands. By the morning of September 20th, 1835, the wake had drawn a pale line between Chatham and our new course. San Cristobal sank into haze, yet I could not treat the channel as empty water. It divided more than land. Behind us lay one history of tortoise, bird, lizard, and stone. Ahead, perhaps another, close enough for sight, distant enough for nature to keep separate accounts. Below decks, near 8 bells on September 20th, discipline resumed its iron rhythm. The watch changed, sails were trimmed, and my poor specimens demanded more care than my shaking hands wished to give. I dried skins, checked labels, stoppered spirits, and felt the old seasickness rising with the ship's roll. Science at sea was not revelation alone. It was salt, fatigue, ink, and the fear that one careless hour might ruin a clue. On September 20th, toward noon, I bent over the chart while the cabin lamp swung above the Galápagos lines. South and east bore names, soundings, courses. Northward, the paper thinned into invitation. There was room there for rock, surf, birds, perhaps another sealed history, yet no order carried us to it. I marked nothing, and still the blank seemed to mark me, like an island withheld by the sea. Captain Fitzroy, on the afternoon of September 20th, 1835, stood over bearings and coastal angles as if the islands were problems in geometry. His duty was noble, to make these dangerous waters legible to every ship that followed. Mine was humbler, and perhaps more troublesome. I wanted beetles, birds, shells, any scrap that refused ordinary explanation. He sought the truth of position. I, unknowingly, the truth of change. That night, September 20th, near 10 o'clock, the lead line dropped into black water and returned with numbers whispered like omens. The Beagle crept under reduced sail, lanterns hooded, men listening for surf before seeing rock. Beneath us, unseen ridges rose from volcanic darkness. Around us, islands withheld their animals. I wondered what claws, shells, or wings waited just beyond the reach of our lamps. By the small hours of September 21st, 1835, my table had become a court of doubtful witnesses. A beetle without its lava bed, a bird without its island, a shell without its shore might tell lies by omission. I feared not ignorance, but confusion dressed as knowledge. If San Cristobal, the channel, and the next land were separate pages, then every label must hold the page number, or the whole book would close unread. At daybreak on September 21st, between one volcanic shore and another, I watched the Pacific rule with a blue severity no magistrate could equal. It did not merely divide land from land, it revised what each land might keep. A swimmer failed, a seed arrived, a bird was stranded, and generations passed unseen. I had no doctrine for it yet, only the suspicion that the sea was cutting life into separate drafts. Before noon on September 21st, 1835, a darker tooth of land lifted from the glare ahead, its slopes smoky with distance and old fire. The men called it another island. I could not yet call it another answer. Still, my specimens seemed to stir in their boxes. If tortoises, lizards, and birds awaited there under familiar names, the dreadful promise was this: the same creatures might not be the same at all. Chapter 7, September 23rd, 1835. Floriana's Human Clues. September 23rd, 1835. At Charles Island, which some call Floriana, we came ashore after morning light had hardened upon the lava. This was no untouched wilderness. Huts, paths, and human voices broke the spell before the mockingbirds did. Yet beyond the settlement's smoke, tortoise tracks crossed the dust, and strange life kept its own counsel. Here, man's rough colony and nature's older testimony stood uneasily together. Near 2 o'clock that afternoon, Governor Nicholas Lawson spoke with the confidence of a man reading road signs. "Show him a tortoise shell," he said, and he could tell from which island the creature came. The words struck me harder than the heat. If true, each carapace was not merely armor, but a sealed address. A dangerous thought entered quietly. Geography might be written upon living bone. I entered Lawson's assertion in my notes with a cautious hand, for September 23rd, 1835, had already offered more marvels than certainty. Could a shell truly betray its island, or had long residence taught men to exaggerate small distinctions? At Charles Island, near the afternoon heat, I possessed only testimony, not proof. I marked the claim, then shut the book, unaware how heavily that doubtful line would one day press upon me. By late afternoon, the island bore marks no tide could soften. A cleared patch of scrub, a pen of weary animals, men under sentence or necessity moving between rough shelters, all stood among the lava as intruders and witnesses alike. Goats cropped what tortoises might have taken. Axes had opened paths where plants once decided their own limits. On Floriana, nature did not vanish. It became harder to read cleanly. Toward evening on September 23rd, at Charles Island, I turned from the settlement scars to a plainer witness, the mockingbird. It moved through the dry scrub with a familiar boldness, yet something in its look and manner troubled my memory of Chatham. The little finch-like birds I gathered almost casually, these mockingbirds held my attention. If another island showed another form, the clue would sharpen dangerously. The spring, such as it was, governed Charles Island more sternly than any magistrate. By about 5 o'clock, men, goats, and tortoises seemed drawn into the same narrow arithmetic of thirst. A cask filled slowly, a beast waited, a settler watched the level fall. Here, scarcity was not background, but command. Every track toward water, every cropped leaf, every anxious human face made survival feel like a contest written into the ground. Before night settled on September 23, 1835, Lawson's words returned to me with an odd persistence. Another man had said the island aloud, as if a tortoise carried its birthplace upon its back. Yet in my own mind the pieces still lay apart: shell, spring, mockingbird, lava, hunger, sea. I heard the clue clearly enough. I had not yet built the instrument by which to hear its meaning. At last, near the darkening shore of Charles Island, I felt the day's evidence pressed together without joining. The settlement had spoken in scars, Lawson in tortoise shells, the spring in thirst, the bird in its uneasy difference. Across the channel, other black islands waited under the same Pacific sky. Yet were they truly the same country divided by water, or separate worlds disguised as variations of one world? Chapter 8, September 24, 1835. Birds begin to betray the pattern. September 24, 1835. Shortly after sunrise on Charles Island, the dry scrub began before I did. Notes broke from thorn and cactus, quick, harsh, and oddly assorted, as if the bushes contained more questions than birds. I stood still with my collecting gun lowered. Before feather, beak, or wing could be measured, the island had announced difference by sound. Something unseen was already separating itself from memory. By mid-morning, I laid the Charles Island mockingbirds against those I remembered from Chatham. The distinction was not theatrical, yet it would not vanish. A shade in the plumage, a cast of the bill, a manner almost provincial. Had these been mere individual quirks, chance should have scattered them. Instead, they seemed to keep company with the island itself, as though water had taught each shore its own signature. Toward noon on September 24, 1835, among the pale bushes of Charles Island, I took several small birds almost as an afterthought. Their beaks varied more than their modest bodies first suggested. One stout, one finer, another shaped for some different fare. I wrote them down, but too coolly. My attention still favored grander witnesses. Yet these little bills held a question small enough to be overlooked and large enough to return. In the afternoon heat, my labels seemed less certain than the birds before me. If I called them varieties, I preserved the old order. If species, I admitted a sharper division than distance alone should make. Charles Island lay only one part of this archipelago, yet its creatures pressed for separate names. I turned a specimen in my hand and felt classification cease to be a cabinet and become a precipice. At about 3 o'clock, I bent over a paper tag with more uneasiness than any bird's body had caused me. Charles Island, September 24, 1835. Such few words appeared humble, yet they might decide whether a specimen spoke plainly or fell mute forever. A beak without its island was almost an orphan fact. I tied the label carefully, feeling that geography itself had entered the evidence. Again the creatures let me trespass upon their little dominion. A bird watched my hand approach before yielding a single hop. A lizard held its stone as if man were no ancient enemy. This was not mere innocence, but a condition repeated by the sea. Charles Island, like Chatham before it, seemed to have bred life in a chamber apart, where fear itself had lacked sufficient teachers. By lamplight that evening, September 24th, 1835, I set the Charles Island birds beside my notes from Chatham. Feathers, bills, tags, and place names lay in a disorder that was not entirely confusion. Here was likeness, there a departure, here a familiar form, there a local accent in bone. I could not draw the design. Still, the fragments had begun to face one another across the table. Near midnight on Charles Island, September 24th, 1835, the birds would not let my mind rest. Their slight differences had become more troubling than any monstrous form could be, for they wore familiarity like a disguise. If each island gave the same creation a different edge, where did variety end and species begin? The old boundary, once so neat in books, trembled under the weight of wings. Chapter 9, September 25, 1835. Marine iguanas at the edge of belief. September 25th, 1835. Before 9 in the morning, I reached the black shore where rumor had promised lizards. At first I saw only lava, cracked, blistered, and wet with spray. Then the rock appeared to breathe. Scores of dark bodies lay upon it, so like the island in color and stillness that creature and coast seemed cast from the same furnace. The clue had hidden by resembling its prison. By 9:30, on the shore of Charles Island, I watched one of those black reptiles quit the lava and commit itself to the surf. The act offended every tidy shelf in my mind. A lizard belonged to heat, dust, and stone, not to green water lifting over its back. Yet there it swam, neither fish nor ordinary land creature, carrying the island's mystery into the sea. Toward 10 o'clock, September 25th, 1835, I understood the matter more plainly. The reptile had not entered the water from madness, but from economy. These shores offered little green comfort above the tide. Below it, weed clung to the rocks in dark ribbons. What seemed grotesque at first became almost sensible. Claws for lava, tail for swimming, mouth for the sea's poor pasture. I confess the creature repelled me. Its flattened face, briny skin, and solemn spitting seemed fashioned to mock all elegance in nature. Yet disgust is a poor instrument if it blinds the observer. By late morning, as surf burst white about the rocks, I saw the animal hold its place with astonishing command. Ugly, yes, but fitted, deliberate, and master of a border where I could scarcely stand. Near 11, still on Charles Island, I tried the report against patience. I drove several iguanas toward the water and watched what followed, not once, but again and again. Though built for the sea, each scrambled back to shore as if the surf were the greater danger. Hunger sent them below, alarm returned them to lava. Thus the animal corrected rumor. Its habits were not simple, but measured by circumstance. At 11:15, I knelt where the lava still looked newly cooled, and saw the iguana less as a beast than as a piece of the island made restless. Its black hide answered the basalt. Its hooked claws gripped the broken crust. Its flattened teeth cropped the submerged weed that barren rock denied above. Here geology, hunger, color, and limb seemed joined, as if the volcano had written itself into flesh. By noon on September 25th, 1835, Charles Island had arranged its evidence in an order I could no longer treat as accident. The tortoises whispered difference in their shells. The birds betrayed it in smaller marks and voices. But these black iguanas declared it openly, with every claw, scale, and dreadful plunge. If an island could press itself so plainly upon a reptile, what else had I mistaken for permanence? Towards 6 o'clock that evening, September 25, 1835, the sun dropped behind Charles Island and turned the wet lava copper red. The iguanas lay again upon the stones, neither miracle nor monstrosity, but answers in a language I had not been taught to read. I shut my notebook slowly. Could place reach deeper than climate and habit, deeper even than doctrine allowed, and shape life at its very root? Chapter 10, September 26 to 27, 1835. the human island and the natural island. Before sunrise on September 26, 1835, Charles Island betrayed a different presence. Smoke lifted beyond the scrub, not from crater or lava vent, but from a human camp. Axes rang, voices carried, somewhere a pot clattered against iron. I had imagined these islands as nature's sealed cabinets, each drawer holding its own strange proof. Yet here, among tortoise paths and mockingbird calls, mankind had already set his hand upon the evidence. At 7:30 on September 26, on Charles Island, I found hoof marks cutting across the dust where tortoise tracks should have lain clean. Goats, brought by men, had bitten the scant shrubs to ragged stems. Dogs nosed through the settlement margin with a hunger not born of these shores. The island was no longer merely selecting among its own inhabitants. A second, harsher experiment had been loosed upon it. Late morning, September 26, 1835, I watched a tortoise carcass turn for meat beside the settlement, its shell emptied before I had learned what island secret it carried. A mockingbird flashed through the scrub and vanished where goats had stripped the leaves thin. I felt a new alarm. Evidence was not waiting obediently for science. It breathed, fled, was eaten, was mislabeled, or perished before its meaning could be known. By noon on September 26, 1835, Charles Island gave its testimony in two voices. A settler spoke first, declaring that tortoise shells betrayed their native island as plainly as a sailor's accent betrays his port. Then the land answered without words. Different birds in the scrub, browsed shrubs, paths broken by foreign hoofs, lava holding its own stubborn forms. Human report and natural sign pointed together toward one unsettling truth. Each island kept its own account. I therefore sharpened my only weapon against confusion, the notebook. September 26, 1835, Charles Island, hour, weather, ground, collector, specimen. Shell fragment from the settlement edge, mockingbird from dry scrub, plant bitten low beside a lava path. If memory should soften these distinctions, ink must resist it. For in these islands, a creature without its place was half a fact, and half a fact might lead the mind astray. Yet as the afternoon of September 26th waned on Charles Island, another voice pressed harder than any settler's, the old teaching carried from home, that each creature had been set in its proper form, fixed and finished. I did not cast it off. I felt it leaning over my shoulder while I wrote. But the shells, birds, lizards, and lava gave no easy obedience to so tidy an order. At first light on September 27, 1835, off Charles Island, the Beagle made ready to quit the anchorage. Casks thudded, canvas stirred, and Florina's dry hills withdrew behind a veil of sea glare. Yet I did not leave empty-handed. Lawson's tortoise claim, the altered scrub, the mockingbirds, the black lizards, the stubborn lava, all came aboard with me, sharper now, and more perilous than any specimen in a jar. Before sunset on September 27, 1835, the chart drew my eye westward. Charles Island had spoken too plainly to be dismissed, yet one island's testimony might still be accident, injury, or rumor. Across the water waited another shore, darker and greater, with volcanoes standing like judges above the sea. If its tortoises, birds, and stones answered differently again, then Florina's puzzle would no longer be local mischief, but law beginning to show its face. Chapter 11, September 28, 1835, Isabella's Scale. September 28, 1835, near Albemarle. Toward morning, the island did not merely appear, it mounted from the Pacific like a continent of fire. Its black shoulders ran farther than the eye cared to follow, and vapor clung about distant cones. After Chatham and Charles, I had thought in shores and specimens. Here the very scale rebuked me. What if the clues were not scattered curiosities, but parts of some vast volcanic argument? By 8 o'clock, September 28th, as the Beagle held off Albemarle's coast, I counted not one mountain, but a procession of furnaces. Some cones were cleanly cut against the light, others slumped, breached, or poured black tongues down to the surf. It seemed an island made several times over, each fiery birth laid beside the last. If life had settled here, it had done so upon repeated ruin. Toward noon on September 28, 1835, still off Albemarle, I perceived a stranger division than any channel. Ravines, lava fields, smoky heights, and parched shores stood apart within the same landmass, as though distance had been folded inside one island. A creature bred near the wet uplands might never meet its cousin of the Black Coast. I wrote this uneasily, for separation no longer required open sea. At 1 o'clock that afternoon, September 28th, Albemarle's margin drew near enough to show its burnt masonry. I had trodden Chatham's hard lava and watched Charles Island's dark rocks take the surf. Yet this coast seemed older in menace, though perhaps younger in stone. The same blackness returned, enlarged and multiplied. I felt not recognition but warning. The islands were repeating themselves only to alter the answer. By 2:30, September 28, 1835, off Albemarle, I reopened my boxes and no longer saw isolated prizes. Tortoiseshell, mockingbird skin, lizard scale, dry leaf, each demanded its place beside another from Chatham or Charles. The comparison itself became the specimen. Across these islands, nature seemed to write in columns, repeating names while changing particulars. I feared I had begun a ledger whose sum I could not yet calculate. Near 3 o'clock, September 28, 1835, Albemarle ceased to be a shore and became a labyrinth. Every ridge hid another basin. Every basin suggested its own drought, plant, track, and beast. I tried to set the facts in order, yet the island multiplied them faster than my pencil could command. What if the clue was not one creature, nor one volcano, but the whole bewildering arrangement of place against life? By 4 o'clock on September 28, 1835, with Albemarle vast upon our beam, I studied the chart and felt the voyage narrow even as the islands widened. Far to the north lay water we would not cross, and beyond it a remote rock unknown to my footsteps, later to bear my name as Darwin Island. Its absence troubled me. What evidence waited there, sealed behind distance and our appointed course? Toward 5 o'clock, September 28, 1835, off Albemarle's volcanic flank, I counted cones like dark thoughts rising one after another from the sea. Fire had made the same experiment repeatedly: crater, lava, ash, shore, scant green. Yet the creatures gathered in my memory refused to lie perfectly alike. If the islands repeat their making, must life repeat also, or does each furnace found a different answer? Chapter 12, September 29, 1835, The Lava Country. At 6 in the morning, September 29, 1835, on Albemarle, I set my boot upon lava broken like black glass. The ground did not receive a man, it opposed him. Each yard cost blood from the hands, a torn stocking, a stumble into knives of stone. Yet amid that savage splendor, I wondered what creature could cross such country by inheritance, not accident, and call this ruin home. By 7:30, September 29, 1835, Albemarle's sun had turned the lava into an anvil. My tongue cleaved to my mouth. The water in our vessel seemed less a comfort than a vanishing reprieve. Heat rose from below and fell from above, leaving no mercy between. Then I saw the question plainly. Any animal living here must not merely endure the island, but be fitted to its punishment. Near 9 o'clock on September 29, 1835, inland on Albemarle, the color green appeared less as scenery than treasure. A grey bush, a bitter leaf, a cactus pad bruised with moisture, each stood apart upon the lava-like provisions placed by a miserly hand. I had imagined tropical islands generous. Here, every edible shoot seemed contested before it grew, and scarcity itself began to look like an author of forms. Before 10 o'clock that same morning, September 29, 1835, I came upon a giant tortoise advancing over Albemarle's cruel lava with a patience that seemed almost defiant. Its feet found purchase where mine slipped, its neck reached for the poorest thorn as though it were banquet enough. In that slow, armored body, life had answered fire not with speed, but with endurance, economy, and an ancient refusal to perish. Toward 10 o'clock, September 29th, 1835, on Albemarle, I ceased looking only at the tortoise and studied the road it had written. Broad impressions crossed the lava, bent round fissures, descended toward scant shade, and returned toward some hidden necessity. These were not idle wanderings. They read like sentences in a language of thirst and memory, a living map pressed patiently into stone. At 10:15, September 29th, 1835, Albemarle showed me its smallest victors. A wiry plant, powdered with ash, thrust roots into a crack no wider than my knife blade. Another curled its leaves against the sun, hoarding life in silence. Beauty was present, yes, but sternly rationed. This island did not welcome every seed. It admitted only those able to bargain with drought, fire, and stone. By 10:30, September 29th, 1835, my boots were cut, my throat raw, and each step over Albemarle's lava demanded a decision. I felt, in my own weakness, what no cabinet specimen could teach. This ground exacted payment. A creature too soft-footed, a plant too thirsty, a bird too careless with shade, would be charged beyond its means. The island was not cruel from malice, it was exacting by nature. Near 11 o'clock on September 29th, 1835, upon Albemarle's black interior, I stood still and listened to the heat ticking in the stone. Around me, claws, roots, shells, and wings seemed less like accidents than answers to a severe examination. The island offered no charity, only terms. And so I wrote the question that would not leave me: what kind of life does such a place permit, and what kind does it refuse? Chapter 13, September 30, 1835, Repetition with Difference. September 30th, 1835, shortly after sunrise on Albemarle, I opened my notes from Chatham and Charles Island beside the fresh page. The words appeared obedient: tortoise, lizard, mockingbird, shrub. Yet the creatures themselves would not obey. A shell rose differently, a bird carried another temper, a lizard chose another habit. The same names had crossed the sea with me, but the bodies beneath them had changed their accents. At 7 o'clock that morning, I drew 3 columns in my book: Chatham, Charles, Albemarle. Beneath each, the entries began to answer one another like witnesses examined apart. Dry lava here, dry lava there, tortoise paths here, altered shells there, mockingbirds separated by water, yet refusing to be merely the same. Line by line, the blank spaces narrowed. I had not found a conclusion, but the evidence had begun to arrange itself. Before 8 bells on September 30th, 1835, still on Albemarle, I returned to Lawson's troubling assertion that a tortoise might carry its island upon its back. Once I had smiled at such confidence. Now, after Chatham, Charles Island, and this vast black shore, the jest had hardened. A saddle here, a domed breadth there, were no longer curiosities. They asked which island had shaped the shell, and why. By mid-morning, September 30th, 1835, on Albemarle, the birds troubled me more quietly than the tortoises. My mockingbirds from Charles Island stood apart in memory from those of Chatham. The smaller finch-like birds, though less orderly in my labels, showed beaks that would not let comparison rest. If shells could speak of islands, perhaps wings and bills whispered the same confession, only faster, lighter, and easier to overlook. Near noon, with the sun whitening the lava of Albemarle, I broke a black crust in my hand and felt how recent this world must be. Yet the sea, the winds, and the slow arrivals of life spoke of ages beyond a ship's reckoning. If rock could cool, crack, weather, and receive plants by degrees, might living forms also alter by degrees? I wrote the question cautiously, without a name for it. After noon on September 30th, 1835, I looked from Albemarle across the glittering channels and imagined each island shut like a separate room. The same rough beginnings might arrive by wing, current, or accident. Yet once confined among different rocks, droughts, foods, and enemies, they would be handled by different tools. Chatham, Charles, Albemarle, not copies, but experiments conducted in solitude, with the ocean keeping the doors locked. At 2 o'clock, September 30th, 1835, on Albemarle, I shut my notebook for a moment, lest my pen outrun my proof. The tortoises, mockingbirds, lizards, plants, larvae, and channels pressed toward one unsettling thought. Still, I would not call suspicion a law. A naturalist must distrust his own excitement. These islands were not yet an answer. They were a summons to collect, compare, and wait. Toward 3 o'clock on September 30th, 1835, Albemarle seemed less an island than a cipher written in heat, salt, and black stone. I had searched for order by smoothing particulars away. Now the particulars resisted me. One shell unlike another, one bird subtly altered, one lizard fitted to its shore. These were not blemishes upon the record. I began to suspect the differences were the record, and perhaps the message itself. Chapter 14, October 1st, 1835. Santiago and the evidence multiplies. By morning watch, October 1st, 1835, HMS Beagle stood off James Island, called Santiago by earlier charts. Its shore rose in dark ledges, neither welcoming nor wholly barren, as if some furnace had built another proving ground for life. I came ashore with my boxes and hammer, feeling not arrival but examination. Chatham, Charles, and Albemarle had each altered the question. Now James waited to test it again. Before the sun had climbed high on October 1st, 1835, I learned that James Island would not be granted to me as a mere glimpse. Here, for once, hours might become days. I marked the thought with uncommon satisfaction, for a single landing deceives the eye. To watch the same paths twice, to meet the same creatures under another light, might expose whether strangeness was accident, habit, or law still hiding its name. By late morning, October the 1st, 1835, I climbed inland upon James Island, and the country changed by degrees rather than by command. Near the coast, salt, lava, and thorny scrub held dominion. Higher up, the air softened, and greener patches appeared like evidence withheld until earned. The island seemed arranged in belts of hardship and relief. If plants obeyed height and moisture so closely, what else might be answering the same invisible rule? At noon on October the 1st, 1835, in the uplands of James Island, I met the giant tortoises again. Yet I could no longer look upon them as isolated marvels. Their heavy tread recalled Chatham's paths, Charles Island's reported shell distinctions, and Albemarle's harsh lava country. Here was the same ancient patience, but placed in another theatre. I felt the comparison press harder than the creature itself. In the afternoon of October 1st, 1835, upon James Island, I began collecting with a severity I had not shown at first landfall. Beetles, plants, birds, shells, and stones were no longer mere prizes for cabinets. Each required its place, hour, height, and surrounding country. I wrote Santiago beside them as carefully as their names. A specimen stripped of its island might become only a curiosity. With its island, it might become testimony. Toward 3 o'clock, October 1st, 1835, on James Island, the sailors judged a tortoise by its meat, a cask by its usefulness, a bird by whether it could be knocked down for sport. I could not blame them. A ship survives by such reckonings. Yet my own hunger had altered. Every claw, shell, seed, and feather seemed to ask for a place in the argument, though I still lacked the argument itself. By 4 o'clock, October 1st, 1835, James Island no longer offered separate facts, but passages crossing one another. A tortoise track led toward damp ground. A bird's beak suggested some hidden diet. A plant changed with the slope. Black lava held its own hard lesson. Each clue answered another only by raising two more questions. The maze had tightened, not opened, and I found myself deeper within it. As evening drew over James Island on October 1st, 1835, I closed my book without closing the question. One hurried visit might deceive, a second path might correct the first. The tortoise, the bird, the plant, the lava, each seemed to change meaning when watched longer. I resolved to return at morning light. for only repeated days could tell whether patience would alter the evidence or merely make it impossible to ignore. Chapter 15, October 2nd, 1835. Patient observation. At 6:30 on the morning of October 2nd, 1835, I retraced yesterday's stony course on James Island, keeping my eyes low and my judgment lower still. The same lava ridge, the same scrub, the same pale dust lay before me, yet I would not trust their first testimony. If a tortoise track, a bird's paws, or a leaf station appeared unchanged, then the island was not merely surprising me. It was repeating itself. By 8 o'clock, October 2nd, 1835, the creatures of James Island seemed less capricious than commanded by circumstance. The small birds returned to particular bushes, not any bush. Lizards kept to stones warmed first by the sun. Tortoises pressed along the same worn passages toward moisture. These were not freakish habits scattered by chance. The island appeared to have written instructions upon every living body, and each obeyed without knowing why. Toward 10 o'clock, October 2nd, 1835, James Island sorted itself by green degrees. Below, near the hot lava and salt air, thorny shrubs clung low and meager, offering little but defense. Higher on the slope, where mist lingered, leaves broadened, grasses softened, and food seemed less grudgingly allowed. I began to suspect that height itself was a boundary, and moisture a quiet lawmaker. Near 11 o'clock, October 2nd, 1835, I took several little birds in hand upon James Island, and found their bills not all fashioned alike. One stout beak seemed fit for cracking harder seeds. Another, finer point, might search among softer growth or insects. I dared not make a doctrine of it. Yet beside the island's scant table, even so small an instrument as a beak began to look suspiciously purposeful. Shortly after midday on October 2nd, 1835, I followed the tortoise roads of James Island and compared them with Chatham, Charles, and Albemarle in my notes. Here, as elsewhere, the great animals climbed with solemn certainty toward damp ground, as if thirst had surveyed the island before any man. Yet the distances, slopes, and scarcity differed. Could the shell, stride, and endurance of each race be answering its own geography? By 1 o'clock, October 2nd, 1835, on James Island, the pattern had ceased to be a curiosity and had acquired teeth. If tortoises, birds, plants, and lizards each answered separate conditions, then my comfortable shelves of variety and species no longer seemed so secure. Still, I checked myself. A traveler may be seduced by arrangement. I wrote the danger down, but left the conclusion unclaimed. At 1:30, October 2nd, 1835, I sat upon a warm block of lava on James Island and made my notebook serve as a net. Into it I tried to draw not merely bird, tortoise, shrub, or lizard, but the invisible cords between them, place, food, habit, and form. The page could not hold the living island, yet without the page, the island's secret would slip back into heat and silence. Toward 2 o'clock that afternoon, October 2nd, 1835, James Island rewarded my lingering only by multiplying the difficulty. The longer I watched, the less any creature stood alone. A plant's thorn, a bird's bill, a tortoise path, a lizard's station on black stone, all appeared joined by circumstances I could scarcely measure. Patience had not delivered certainty. It had opened a deeper cabinet crowded with questions. Chapter 16, October 3rd, 1835. Island isolation becomes the suspect. At sunrise on October 3rd, 1835, from James Island, I looked over the blue channels with a suspicion I had not felt when first we crossed them. They were not empty spaces. They were walls of salt, admitting a bird by chance, a seed by drift, a tortoise almost never. Across each narrow glittering reach, breeding might be halted, habits confined, and history made private. By 8 o'clock on October 3rd, 1835, James Island seemed less an island than a locked workshop. Across the channels, San Cristobal, Floriana, Isabella, and this shore kept their own benches, tools, and trials. Drought here, upland mist there, lava, thorn, surf, and hunger everywhere. If life entered such rooms alike, it did not leave them alike. The thought struck softly, then would not depart. Near 10 o'clock, October 3rd, 1835, aboard the Beagle off James Island, I watched the Pacific cut its bright lines between the lava shores. The sea no longer seemed a blank between entries, but a stern editor, striking out many crossings and permitting only rare passages. What reached an island might remain, be altered, or perish there. Thus water, by withholding company, appeared to give difference room to harden. Before noon, October 3rd, 1835, a colder question entered my notebook. Suppose the mockingbirds, tortoises, and lesser birds of these islands were not separate beginnings, but relations parted by water. Might one old stock, carried here by storm or accident, have taken different shapes under different necessities? I did not dare call it truth. Yet the resemblance between islands now troubled me as much as the difference. At noon, October 3rd, 1835, on James Island, I shut the notebook for a moment as if the covers could confine the notion. To say that creatures changed apart from one another was to step beyond evidence into perilous philosophy. I had specimens, dates, places, and uneasiness, not a doctrine. So I wrote cautiously, let the lava glare, and kept the most dangerous conclusion unspoken. After 1 o'clock, October 3rd, 1835, I walked the hot Santiago scrub and found the same accusation wearing many bodies. A bird's beak suited a seed, a black iguana's claws gripped surf-slick lava, a tortoise's shell rose or sloped as if shaped by its road. Even the grey plants hoarded moisture like misers. Not one marvel then, but a repeated whisper, each place seemed to fit its inhabitants tightly. By 2 o'clock, October 3rd, 1835, I had no proper name for the suspicion. Certainly not Darwinism, that word belonged to no page of mine, no cabin talk, no printed argument. Here on James Island there were only heat, specimens, channels, and a mind unwilling to outrun its evidence. If some hidden rule joined these facts, it still moved nameless beneath the ink, like fire under black lava. Near 3 o'clock, October 3rd, 1835, the channel glittered between James Island and its neighbors like a locked door. I had blamed heat, food, lava, and chance, yet water stood behind them all, keeping each small world apart. If creatures differed because they had been kept from mingling, then isolation was no mere circumstance. It had become my chief suspect, though I could not yet pronounce sentence. Chapter 17, October 4, 1835, Specimen Trouble. October 4th, 1835. Before breakfast aboard the Beagle, I spread my Galápagos gatherings across a rough table, skins, beaks, shells, plants, tags, and scraps of penciled place names. In daylight they seemed mere objects, poor silent things robbed of heat and lava. Yet each demanded its island, hour, and circumstance. Without James Island, without Chatham, without Charles Island, a specimen was not evidence, but a riddle stripped of its key. At 7:30 on October 4th, 1835, shame pricked me sharper than any cactus spine. Some birds bore their island names faithfully, others lay too loosely marked, as if Chatham, Charles, Albemarle, and James were interchangeable scratches on a sailor's chart. They were not. If the small beaks had been gathered from separate worlds, my careless labels had blurred the very borders I was beginning to fear might matter most. Toward 8 o'clock that morning, October 4th, 1835, I felt the birds had outstripped my eye. I could skin, measure, and preserve them, but not yet compel them to confess their true relations. Somewhere beyond this hot cabin, in England's ordered rooms, sharper ornithological judgment would be needed. These small bodies, dull in death, seemed to wait for another man's gaze to reveal what I had only half seen. By 8 bells, I saw one mercy among my confusions. The mockingbirds, plainer than the celebrated little seed-eaters would later appear, carried better papers. Charles Island, Chatham, James, their names clung to them like dust from their own lava paths. Their differences had troubled me in the field, Now their labels preserve the trail. If any bird could lead me back from disorder toward island truth, it was not yet the finch, but the mockingbird. Near 9 o'clock, October 4th, 1835, the little finch-like birds lay quieter than accusation. Their beaks differed, yes, but I had not yet given those differences their proper island voices. They were not heroes to me, not the center of any grand doctrine, only modest skins among many uncertainties. Still, in their silence I sensed a locked cabinet of meaning, awaiting England, classification, and a fame I could not imagine. By the dim cabin light, a worse thought settled over my table. Nature may speak plainly, yet I may carry her words home in the wrong order. A tag smudged by damp, a specimen spoiled by heat, a locality guessed instead of known, and the chain snaps. On October 4th, 1835, off James Island, I learned that ignorance is not always empty. Sometimes it is evidence mishandled. At 9:30, October 4th, 1835, off James Island, I closed my book with less pride than worry. I had seen much: lava, tortoises, mockingbirds, lizards, and those troublesome small birds. Yet seeing is not understanding. I dare not write as though Providence had whispered the whole design into my ear. I possessed fragments, not a law; suspicions, not certainty; a diary, not a verdict. Past 10 o'clock, the Beagle creaked in the dark water beyond James Island, and my specimens seemed suddenly less like trophies than fugitives. Each skin, shell, and note required rescue from damp, haste, appetite, and my own imperfect judgment. I had crossed these volcanic shores seeking facts. Now I feared the facts might escape me. The doctrine that would one day bear my name would rest on evidence that had nearly slipped through my hands. Chapter 18, October 5th, 1835. The pattern tightens around Darwin. October 5th, 1835, shortly after sunrise off James Island, I spread yesterday's pages beneath the cabin's paling light. The entries no longer sat apart. Lava answered tortoise, drought answered beak, channel answered mockingbird. The black iguana answered the shore itself. I could not yet name the force binding them, and feared to invent one, yet the islands had begun to arrange my doubts for me. Near 11 o'clock that morning, October 5th, I turned from my specimens to the shore beyond the stern. The island seemed scarcely cooled from its making, yet already it possessed its own accents of life. A tortoise shell, a bird's bill, a lizard's claw on lava, these were not separate curiosities. They felt like chapters of one local history, written first in fire, then revised in flesh. By noon on October 5th, 1835, the heat had made every green leaf look like treasure. Want was not merely a condition here, it appeared to have a shape. The tortoise carried height and patience toward distant water. The small birds worked their bills among seeds and insects. The marine iguana took its hunger into the surf. In each creature, famine seemed answered by form, habit, and place. In the early afternoon of October 5th, 1835, I watched the channel lie bright and pitiless between James Island and its neighbors. A few miles of salt water might be more decisive than leagues of continent if it kept creatures apart long enough. These rocks looked young to the eye, yet time here was not empty. Given ages, separation might turn small differences into settled forms, island answering island without ever touching. By 2 o'clock, still on October 5th, I began to distrust the word oddity. A shell unlike its neighbor, a call altered from island to island, a reptile fitted to black stone and salt water. These were not blemishes upon order. They were the order showing through. If I had mistaken difference for confusion, the Galápagos now corrected me. Variation itself was speaking, quietly, persistently, from every shore. At 2:30, my pencil stopped above the page. I had suspicion enough to make my hand uneasy, but not proof enough to name it. No doctrine stood before me on James Island, no finished law rising from the lava. I possessed only particulars: dates, shells, birds, hunger, distance, time. The truth, if truth it was, remained below the surface, like a reef felt by the keel before it is seen. Toward 3 o'clock on October 5, 1835, on James Island, I closed the notebook as if a word had approached and then withdrawn. I could not write it, for it did not yet belong to me. Perhaps England, years hence, would give these scattered facts a sharper voice. Perhaps 1859 lay hidden in this afternoon's dust. For now, I had only the islands, and their silence felt deliberate. By late afternoon, October 5, 1835, the light slanted over James Island and made every black ridge seem accusatory. I felt no triumph, only pursuit. Lava, drought, tortoise, mockingbird, iguana, channel, and age had ceased to be separate entries. They pressed together like witnesses crowding a cabin door. Wherever I turned my mind, the same implication followed, tightening about me like evidence that would not let go. Chapter 19, October 6 to 8, 1835. The Northern Absence Returns. On the morning of October 6, 1835, aboard the Beagle off James Island, I bent over the chart while the cabin lamp trembled with the swell. Northward, the paper thinned into distances our course did not promise to conquer. I traced blank sea with my finger and felt a peculiar disappointment, as if some further volcanic witness waited beyond the margin, silent, remote, and already refusing my notebook. October 6th to 8th, 1835, the Beagle held to her appointed work among the Galápagos, but not to that far northern rock. I must set this down plainly. I did not land there. I did not climb its lava, net its birds, or trouble its shore with my boots. The island later called Darwin Island remained beyond my footsteps, beyond my specimens, beyond even the reach of my day's evidence. Only later, with a scholar's backward glance, do I feel the irony sharpen. A place my 1835 hand never sketched would take my name, as though the map itself had read meanings I had not yet dared to write. On October 7th, while we sounded other waters, that northern island waited unnamed to me. Its future title would honor not my arrival, but the thought these islands helped awaken. What forms might isolation have written upon that unseen shore, I could not know. Perhaps only the same hard lessons in another hand, a beak altered by food, a shell by thirst, a creature made peculiar by rock, wind, and want. I claim no specimen from it, no discovery, no witnessed marvel. Yet on October 8, 1835, its absence enlarged the question, how many variations lay beyond my reach? By the evening watch of October 8, 1835, near James Island, I understood that a ship's course is also a boundary of knowledge. The Beagle's keel drew a line through the Galápagos, and science had to obey it. What I collected could speak. What I missed could only accuse my certainty. Every voyage returns with specimens, yes, but also with vacancies, and those vacancies keep honest men from calling their map complete. At 9 o'clock that night, October 8, 1835, I looked northward over a black, breathing sea and felt the most troublesome evidence was not aboard us. San Cristobal, Floriana, Isabella, and Santiago had given me bodies, tracks, cries, and doubts. But the future Darwin Island gave me nothing at all. That nothingness had weight. It hung beyond the chart like a locked cabinet named for me, yet closed against my hand. Still, my chest was not empty of proof. From September 16th on San Cristobal, through Floriana, Isabella, and Santiago, I had seen lava newborn and merciless, tortoise roads worn toward water, shells rumored to mark their island, mockingbirds shifting from shore to shore, small beaks quietly varying, marine iguanas grazing beneath the surf. These were no fantasies of the north. They lay in my boxes, my pages, my unsettled mind. Thus my diary for October 8, 1835, closed not with a landing, but with a margin. The Galápagos had answered in fragments, each island whispering its own alteration, yet the far north remained mute. I did not step upon that rock, did not frighten its birds or measure its shore. Long afterward, men would call it Darwin Island. To me, it was only the Shadow Island, a future name fastened to an absence. Chapter 20. October 9, 1835. Last Galápagos Observations. October 9, 1835. At first light, I went ashore once more upon James Island. The lava cracked under my boots like cooled iron, its ropes, bubbles, and black glass no longer mere geology. Each surface seemed a record of pressure, heat, and time, and upon it life had written smaller marks. I had arrived seeking specimens. I now walked among questions hardened into stone. By 7:30 that morning, October 9th, the creatures seemed to stand about me as witnesses not yet sworn. The tortoise carried its island in the arch of its shell. The black iguana, salted from the surf, mocked my neat divisions of land and sea. A mockingbird watched from the scrub with a different face than its cousins. The small birds, hardly honored in my notes, kept their beaks closed over a secret. I ruled the page as though the archipelago were an account book. September 16, Chatham, dry lava, unwary birds, fear absent where I expected flight. September 23, Charles Island, tortoises, shells said to betray birthplace, mockingbirds altered by place. September 28 onward, Albemarle, black shores and volcanoes enlarged into a system. October 1 to 9, James Island, patient watching, sharper labels, and little beaks. The columns would not balance. No doctrine fell in me that morning. It receded as a tide withdraws from rocks it had long covered. At 8 o'clock on James Island, October 9th, 1835, I still wrote cautiously, perhaps variety, perhaps accident, perhaps imperfect observation. Yet each excuse stood farther off than before. Fixed creation had not vanished from my mind. It had merely lost the comfortable nearness of shore. Below deck before 9, I wrapped skins, bones, plants and birds in paper, twine, and anxious ink. Salt air crept even into the boxes, threatening mildew and confusion. I marked James Island where I could, though not always with the care these creatures deserved. Once shut beneath planks, they seemed less like trophies than sealed questions, carried by the Beagle toward England, awaiting minds colder than mine to open them. Near 9 o'clock, as the Beagle's timbers stirred beneath my boots, I found the question itself had changed shape. I had come asking what these animals were, and by what marks they should be named. Now James Island pressed a darker inquiry upon me. Why should place leave such signatures at all? I had no answer on October 9th, 1835. Yet ignorance, once quiet, had begun to move. By late morning, October 9th, 1835, the Galápagos lay about me like furnaces quenched at their edges by a blue, impatient sea. Smoke-colored lava met white surf, cactus shadows pricked the ash, black iguanas clung where waves burst into spray. Above them, birds watched without alarm, as if men were only another passing weather. I took my leave of those fire islands with no key in hand, only their strangeness burning behind me. The anchor came up with a wet groan, and by noon the Beagle leaned from James Island into open water. I watched the lava ridges diminish, expecting distance to restore proportion. It did not. San Cristobal, Floriana, Isabella, Santiago, their names beat in my notebook like separate pulses. We were leaving the Galápagos on October 9th, 1835, yet some inward tide carried the islands after me. Chapter 21, October 20, 1835, Leaving the Archipelago. On or about the 20th of October 1835, the Galápagos ceased to be ground beneath my feet and became a burden of memory. By the afternoon watch, the Beagle stood out under canvas, her bow set away from those black shores. I wrote the date carefully, sensing no discovery complete, only a door closing. Behind us lay the islands. Before us, the long delay in understanding them. Astern, near 4 bells, the peaks withdrew into a low blue stain, then into mere doubts upon the horizon. I had thought their smallness would quiet me. Instead, every mile enlarged them. What power had taught a tortoise, its island, a bird, its manna, a lizard, the sea? The Beagle sailed westward, but my mind remained among those volcanic shores, where each answer had opened like another channel. Below deck, the islands survived in another form: skins, bones, plants, shells, and small birds wrapped against damp and ruin. Each parcel bore a name when I had been wise enough to give it one, and each seemed less a possession than a sealed hour from Chatham, Charles, Albemarle, or James. England lay months ahead, yet already these mute bundles waited like witnesses, keeping their testimony until sharper eyes could question them. My journal, more than my memory, now became the vessel. In its pages stood September 16th at Chatham, September 23rd at Charles Island, the days among Albemarle's lava, and October's long scrutiny of James. I had written hours, bearings, skins, shells, and doubts in ink that still smelled of the cabin. If the islands were falling astern, their order was not lost. It travelled under my hand. No doctrine came to me upon that sea. On October 20, 1835, by lamplight in the Beagle's motion, I possessed no law of natural selection, no finished argument against the fixity of species. I had only unease, tortoises, mockingbirds, iguanas, lava, labels, distances. To pretend otherwise would make the voyage too simple. The truth was darker and more useful. The clues had survived me before I understood them. By midnight, with the cabin boards creaking under the Pacific swell, I found the old question altered. I had asked whether this bird or that tortoise was a species, a variety, a curiosity misnamed. Now the harder inquiry pressed nearer. Why should each creature seem fitted to its own black shore, dry height, scarce water, and separating sea? Place itself had become part of the specimen. Off the northern darkness there remained, though I never saw it, a further rock beyond my course. No brute of mine touched that remote island. No specimen in my chest could honestly bear its witness. Yet as the Beagle drew away on October 20th, 1835, I felt the chart itself accusing me. One day it would carry my name, but tonight it was only absence, fading behind sea and starlight. The Galápagos had ended as land, but not as an expedition. After October 20, 1835, the Beagle's prow cut into a wider Pacific, and my mind went on sounding depths no lead could touch. The strange animals were no longer merely behind me. They had become questions stowed among my papers. I sailed westward from volcanic islands, unaware that the harder voyage would begin only when I tried to explain them. Chapter 22, 1836 to 1837, England reopens the evidence. On October 3rd, 1836, at Falmouth, England, near evening, I came ashore with crates, skins, bones, plants, and an embarrassment of doubts. The Galápagos were months astern, yet their black lava seemed packed in every box. I had not brought home Darwinism, nor even a clear rebellion against old doctrine. I brought labels, imperfect memories, island names, and questions waiting for English rooms and sharper eyes. In London, through the winter of 1836 into 1837, my birds passed from my uncertain hands to men trained to read feathers, bills, and bones as I had read lava. What I had packed as small, troublesome specimens began to sort themselves into a sterner order. Island after island seemed to speak again, not in surf or heat, but beneath lamplight, tweezers, lenses, and expert eyes. Then Mr. John Gould looked up from the Galápagos skins and disturbed the room more than any surf had disturbed the Beagle. These were not merely odd little birds from a hot archipelago. The finches, so carelessly humble in my memory, stood apart in unexpected forms. The mockingbirds, too, confirmed differences island by island. In early 1837, England returned my specimens to me as evidence with sharper teeth. Only then did the quietest trophies begin to accuse me. In the Galápagos, during September and October 1835, I had watched small birds flit through thorn and ash without granting them command of the mystery. Now, in England, in early 1837, Gould's classification gave their beaks a new gravity. What I had taken for minor varieties became a troubling company of distinct forms, gathered from islands I had crossed too quickly. Yet it was the mockingbirds that pricked me first and deepest. I could remember them from Charles Island, Chatham, and the other lava shores, not as a blur of little beaks, but as birds whose forms kept their island signatures. In England, early 1837, that clarity returned with force. Before the finches became famous, these mockingbirds had already whispered the dangerous possibility. Neighbouring islands might fashion neighbouring kinds. A bitter fact now fastened upon me. Some labels were too poor to bear the weight I had put upon them. London, early 1837, offered tables, drawers, and learned counsel, yet no expert could restore an island name I had failed to secure in September 1835. A bird without its shore became half a witness. The evidence still spoke, but in places my own hand had muffled it. By lamplight in London, early 1837, the old word variety no longer sat harmlessly in my notes. If a Galapagos form differed only a little, was it merely a local accident, or the first step toward a species? The question had followed me from Chatham, Charles Island, Albemarle, and James. Now it stood indoors, sharpened by cabinets and names. I felt the border between kinds begin to tremble. In London, toward midnight in early 1837, I looked from the specimens to my Galapagos notes and felt the room alter. Chatham, Charles Island, Albemarle, and James were no longer distant stations of a youthful voyage. Their birds, shells, skins, and labels had returned as interrogators. What had crossed the sea in crates now pressed against the doctrine of separate, fixed creations, asking whether creation itself had a history. Chapter 23, 1837. The First Transmutation Notebooks. In July 1837, behind a London door and away from polite discussion, I opened a private notebook for a perilous word: transmutation. My field diary had once fixed noon heat, lava shores, and island names. This new book risked asking what those facts implied. I did not possess a finished theory. I possessed a trail of Galapagos clues, and the uneasy courage to let them threaten permanence itself. On the afternoon of July 1837, my London desk seemed crowded with islands. San Cristobal's lava, Floriana's mockingbirds, Isabella's tortoise roads, and Santiago's dry uplands would not remain filed as curiosities. Each returned at odd hours, insisting upon comparison. The Beagle had left the Galapagos on October 20, 1835, yet now, in ink and silence, the archipelago resumed its voyage through me. Late July 1837, after the hour had grown small, I set beside one another the likenesses that had troubled me most. Why should neighboring islands possess creatures so near in plan, yet not the same? Separate acts of creation felt less like an answer than an evasion. A darker possibility entered my pen. Perhaps these forms were kin, descended from some earlier stock, altered apart by place, time, and circumstance. By lamplight on a wet London night in July 1837, I returned to the sea between the islands. Those channels, which in 1835 had seemed mere distances for the Beagle to cross, now appeared as walls. A bird confined to Floriana, a tortoise line held on Isabella, might breed only among its own. Given years beyond counting, such separated companies need not remain alike. Near midnight in London, July 1837, my pen ceased to march in straight lines. The Galapagos evidence would not arrange itself like specimens in a drawer. It spread, divided, and reached back toward some hidden beginning. I thought of stems, offshoots, and severed twigs, though I dared not yet name the figure. What I had seen among volcanic islands was becoming a shape on paper. Before dawn in London, July 1837, the old names began to fail me. A lizard that fed from the sea was not simply a land creature. A mockingbird slightly altered by island was not comfortably a variety, nor plainly a species. The Galapagos themselves were not mere fragments of America, but separate trials in black lava and salt water. My cabinets held specimens, my mind held broken boundaries. In that London quiet of 1837, I felt the peril was not in ink alone. To suggest that species might pass into other forms was to disturb pulpit, lecture room, family table, and my own training at Cambridge. The Galapagos clues pressed forward, yet every conclusion seemed to trespass upon order itself. I wrote privately, almost guiltily, as if the notebook were a locked cabin in rough weather. The room had no surf, no frigate bell, no smell of hot lava after noon, yet the voyage resumed upon my desk. Page after page became a chart more dangerous than Fitzroy's, San Cristobal, Floriana, Isabella, Santiago, and the northern absence I had never touched. In 1837, behind a closed door in London, I opened my private notebook and found a new field before me. Chapter 24, 1837 to 1838, The Tree and the Pressure. On a July evening in 1837, London held its breath outside my window while I set two small words above the branching sketch. I did not write them as triumph, but as trespass. If life divided like that, then the tortoises, mockingbirds, and sea lizards of the Galápagos were not curiosities alone. They were witnesses. My hand paused, for the line once drawn could not be made innocent again. From that little figure, my thoughts ran backward over the Pacific. Suppose the birds of Florina and Santiago were not separately made puzzles, but neighboring twigs from one older stem. Suppose tortoise, plant, and mockingbird had carried a shared beginning across water, then parted under each island's conditions. The channels I had crossed in September and October of 1835 became spaces between branches, narrow seas where kinship slowly learned difference. In London, on an evening in October 1838, I opened Malthus for amusement and closed him with my pulse altered. Every creature, he argued, tends to increase beyond its means. I thought of dry Galapagos scrub, empty waterholes, crowded nests, and lean beaks searching among thorns. The tree had branches, now a pressure moved through them, silent as thirst, choosing who endured. Only then did the Galapagos hunger change its shape in my mind. The cracked lava of Isabella, the poor scrub of Santiago, the tortoise paths to failing water, were not merely hardships of place. They were signs of a contest spread through all nature. In October 1838, at my London table, scarcity ceased to be scenery. It became pressure, and every island creature stood inside it, striving to leave descendants. By late October 1838, near midnight in London, the smallest differences began to darken with consequence. A beak a little stronger, a shell a little higher, a root a little deeper in ash, such trifles had once seemed taxonomists' trouble. But if hunger, drought, and enemies did not strike equally, then neither would offspring follow equally. Variation was no longer ornament. It was the hinge on which survival might turn. In London, October 1838, after midnight, the specimens seemed to arrange themselves anew. The tortoise shell was not merely an island mark, but a record of trial. The mockingbird's altered note, the iguana's black limbs at surf, the plant gripping cinder with a stubborn root, all spoke of pressure. San Cristobal, Floriana, Isabella, Santiago, each place had tested life differently, and difference had answered. Yet I wrote none of this for the world. Through 1839 and onward, the thought remained locked in notebooks, letters, pigeonholes of evidence, and uneasy silence. What began with the Beagle in 1835, returned with me to England in 1836, branched in 1837, and found pressure in 1838, was still not Darwinism proclaimed. It was a private engine, turning slowly, gathering proof before it dared face daylight. Across the years that followed, the scattered islands drew into one dark instrument. Variations supplied the teeth, struggles supplied the force, inheritance promised that favored forms might pass onward. I had not yet named it for readers, nor proved it to my own satisfaction. But the Galapagos clues were no longer loose specimens. They had approached a mechanism capable of making Darwinism from difference, pressure, and time. Chapter 25, 1839 to 1858, The Long Delay. From 1839 into the long 1840s and 1850s, in England's quiet hours, the Galapagos would not stay behind me. By lamplight, I set island notes beside barnacles, pigeons, coral reefs, fossils, and the stubborn puzzles of classification. What I had gathered at San Cristobal, Floriana, Isabella, and Santiago now fermented among wider proofs. The strange archipelago had become not an answer, but a yeast working through all my studies. At Down House, Kent, after we settled there in September 1842, my study became another cabin of the Beagle. At 8 in the morning, with children's voices beyond the door and illness close at hand, I opened drawers of notes as if opening sea chests. The Galapagos lay far from my window, yet its lava, birds, tortoises, and mist northern shadow kept arriving, demanding order from a quiet English room. By 1844, at Down House, I watched breeders with a naturalist's unease. A pigeon fancier, choosing one beak, one feather, one carriage over another, could alter a race within human memory. At noon, among co-ops and notebooks, the Galapagos returned, if man could select deliberately, might drought, hunger, distance, and death select without intention. The thought was colder than the lava shores, and more powerful. When I turned, in 1845 and after, to geographic distribution, the Enchanted Isles stood up like witnesses. At Down House, near 4 o'clock, I traced how mockingbirds, tortoises, and small birds belonged not merely to creation, but to place. Why should neighboring volcanic islands hold kindred forms, each altered in its own quarter? The map itself began to argue, and the sea between islands became a line of descent. Yet I did not hurry to print what I scarcely dared to name. In the 1840s and 1850s, at Down House, often before breakfast, I weighed not only specimens but consequences. Clergymen, friends, geologists, and my own household lived within older assurances. To suggest that species had histories, not fixed boundaries, was no small correction. I kept working, cautious as a man carrying fire through dry grass. Then, in June 1858, at Down House, the post brought a paper from Alfred Russel Wallace, written from the Malay archipelago. Near midday, I read it with a sinking astonishment. Here was my hidden principle, reached by another road, among other islands. The Galapagos, long shut in my drawers, seemed suddenly to stir. Delay had become danger. Private evidence must now face the public air. So I understood, in that troubled summer of 1858, that my doctrine had not been born on a single Galapagos morning. It had gathered slowly since September 1835, from Chatham lava, Charles Island tortoises, Albemarle shores, James Island birds, English cabinets, breeders' yards, and years at Down House. At 2:30, with Wallace's pages before me, hesitation itself became part of the evidence. By late 1858, my desk at Down House no longer felt private. Proofs, letters, and old notebooks crowded the winter light, and the Galapagos returned with them, shells, beaks, mockingbird skins, black lava remembered from September 1835. I stood at the edge of print. In 1859, those island clues would leave my study and enter dispute, where Darwinism would cease to be a whisper. Chapter 26, November 24, 1859, On the Origin of Species. November 24, 1859, London received my book at last. I was not on black Galapagos lava now, nor beneath the Beagle's canvas, but every page seemed salted by those seas. On the Origin of Species went out in print, carrying years of notebooks, experiments, doubts, and island clues into daylight. The strange animals of 1835 had become public evidence, and the old question could no longer remain privately mine. At last I gave the mechanism its name, natural selection. Not a hand choosing kindly, but life pressed by want, climate, enemies, distance, and time. Since reading Malthus in 1838, I had seen struggle everywhere. Now the Galapagos clues took form. A tortoise shell, a mockingbird's difference, an iguana's sea-black body, each marked variations preserved when they served survival and inheritance, and lost when they did not. By the evening of November 24, 1859, a word began to gather around my name like weather before a storm: Darwinism. It was too small for the thing itself, yet the public needed a handle for the disturbance. What had started with dates, islands, specimens, and doubts now threatened every fixed boundary. Species were no longer statues. They were histories, branching under pressure, and the argument had escaped me. Let no reader imagine that, on some September afternoon in 1835, I stepped ashore and found evolution waiting whole upon the lava. The Galapagos did not hand me a finished theory. They troubled me. San Cristobal, Floriana, Isabella, Santiago, each offered a separate clue, sharp but incomplete. Only after England, experts, notebooks, Malthus, and years of doubt did those clues begin to join into an argument. What most strengthened the case, as I wrote in 1859, was not any single creature, but their arrangement upon the map. Why should neighboring islands hold allied yet distinct forms, while distant continents carried other kinships? The Galapagos off Ecuador had shown me geography behaving like history. Distribution was descent made visible, populations separated by water, altered by time, still bearing the family likeness of a common beginning. Malthus had supplied the dreadful arithmetic, more are born than can be fed, sheltered, or spared. In 1859 I set that pressure beside the island's old evidence. Scarce water, lean plants, black lava, divided shores, these did not merely surround life, they tested it. Any slight advantage, if inherited, might keep a lineage breathing. Fitness, then, was not perfection. It was belonging to one hard place, for one unforgiving hour. At noon, on November 24, 1859, the quarrel left my study and entered drawing rooms, pulpits, lecture halls, and newspapers. The old assurance that each species had been separately fixed could no longer sit undisturbed. My Galapagos doubts, once private scratches beside island names, now struck public doctrine. I had not merely proposed a mechanism, I had loosened a world picture, and every naturalist had to choose where certainty still stood. Yet when the printed pages lay before me on November 24, 1859, my mind did not remain in London ink and paper. It went back, as tide returns to rock, to September and October 1835, to Chatham's lava, Charles Island's tortoise rumours, Albemarle's volcanic bulk, and James Island's dry paths. The book had spoken publicly, but the question first breathed there, among islands lit by a hard Pacific sun. Chapter 27, Darwin Island, the name on the unvisited rock. Beyond the track of the Beagle, far to the northwest of Chatham, Charles, Albemarle, and James, there lies a hard black outpost in the Pacific, Darwin Island. In 1835, it was no station in my diary, no noon landing, no specimen label. I know it now as a remote rock beyond my Galapagos evidence, beaten by surf and distance, dramatic precisely because my footsteps never reached it. Let the record stand plainly. During the Galapagos voyage of September and October 1835, I never visited Darwin Island, never anchored there, and never set foot upon its rock. At no morning watch, noon halt, or evening entry did that far northern place become mine by observation. My Galapagos was Chatham, Charles, Albemarle, James, and the waters between. Darwin Island belonged to another kind of history, a name without my landing. A name may travel where a man has not. Long after the Beagle's 1835 soundings and my hurried island notes, that northwest rock received mine, not because I had climbed its lava, but because the questions born elsewhere had widened around it. Darwin Island became an afterimage, a dark shape on the map lit by Darwinism, carrying the force of an idea rather than the proof of my boots. Here the line must be drawn with a surveyor's care. The evidence I carried from September and October 1835 belonged to islands I had seen, shells, birds, lizards, lava, tracks, labels, doubts. Darwin Island, far northwest, gave me none of these. Its later name is not testimony but emblem. It marks the edge between my gathered facts and the larger shadow my work would cast upon the map. If, in some imagined hour beyond my 1835 course, that northern rock held birds, reptiles, or plants shaped by its own salt, wind, and lava, I cannot summon them as witnesses. They were not mine to name in a notebook. At 6 o'clock off other shores, I had evidence beneath my hand. There, only distance. Darwin Island remains a possibility sealed from my diary, alive perhaps, but unclaimed by my eye. Thus the blank place completes the chart. On October 20, 1835, as the Beagle bore me away from the Galapagos, the island later called Darwin lay beyond my horizon, silent as an unwritten page. Yet its absence gives the tale its measure. San Cristobal, Floriana, Isabella, and Santiago supplied the clues. The unseen rock shows their limit. Even discovery has a shadow, and this one bears my name. By 1859, when my argument entered print, the Galápagos were no longer merely stations in a ship's log. They had become signs of a law wider than any landing party, life altered through descent, pressure, isolation, and time. Therefore, a rock I never reached could still receive my name, not for a footprint left at noon on its lava, but for the idea that made even unseen islands intelligible. So the strangest entry is the one I never wrote. I stepped upon Chatham on September 16, 1835, heard Floriana's claims, crossed Isabella's black fields, and watched Santiago add its patient clues. But Darwin Island entered no day's log, no hour's specimen list, no salt-stained page of mine. The chart's sharpest irony is this: the most Darwin-named place in the Galápagos was not part of Darwin's Galápagos at all. Chapter 28. The Clues Reassembled. First, I must set down the fire. At San Cristobal on September 16, 1835, by the hard glare of noon, and again among Isabella's lava on September 29, the Galápagos offered no garden, only scorched rock, ash, thirst, and thorn. Yet life clung there with dreadful precision. The clue was not beauty, but pressure, young islands making every creature answer the ground beneath it. The second clue walked slowly. On September 18, 1835, near San Cristobal's dry paths, I saw tortoises moving as if their bodies remembered water. By September 23 on Floriana, Lawson's claim returned with sharper force. A shell might tell which island bred it. Roots, thirst, high saddles, rounded domes, and local names joined into one line of evidence. The creature was not merely large, it was geographical. More troubling than the little finches at first were the mockingbirds. On Floriana, September 24, 1835, their markings and manner would not quite match those I had noted on Chatham. Later comparisons with James Island sharpened the unease. These were not grand monsters of lava, but familiar birds altered by address. If each island wrote a different signature upon them, then geography itself had begun to testify. The finches kept their secret longest. In October 1835, on James Island and the neighboring shores, I took small brown birds whose beaks seemed useful, not prophetic. Only after England, in 1837, when John Gould's eye divided my muddled specimens, did their force emerge. Seed crackers, probers, biters, slight instruments tuned to island fare. I had not seen the key in the field, the lock clicked later. Then came the black iguanas, my fifth clue, hauled from rumor into daylight. On September 25, 1835, along Floriana's lava shore, I watched reptiles take possession of the sea. They basked like stones, clawed the surf, and fed where no land lizard should feed. Here was category broken open. Neither shore nor ocean could claim them wholly. The island had not merely housed life, it had bent expectation into habit. Between those sightings lay the true instrument, water. From September 16 to October 20, 1835, the Beagle crossed channels that looked, at noon, like mere blue distance. Yet for tortoise, mockingbird, finch, and iguana, each passage was a wall. Separated on San Cristobal, Floriana, Isabella, and Santiago, small differences could remain, deepen, and be inherited. The sea did not only surround the islands, it gave variation time to accumulate. One clue, however, was made of no specimen at all. Northwest of the routes I knew, beyond my 1835 landings and the Beagle's practical course, stood the remote rock later called Darwin Island. I never set foot there, I took no bird, shell, or lizard from it. Yet the name endured. So absence joins the ledger. A place unseen by me became a symbol of how far the idea would travel. Thus the record would not close like a trap on a single day. September's lava, October's channels, the tortoise shells, the mockingbirds, the finches misunderstood, the sea lizards, and even the northern island I missed, all pressed forward more slowly. their meaning waited through England, notebooks, doubt, and years of labor. The Galapagos did not hand me Darwinism at once. They altered the road by which my mind must travel. Chapter 29. What Darwinism Changed. What, then, did those islands teach after November 24, 1859 gave my argument to the world? Not that each creature began separately upon its rock, but that related forms may descend from common forebears, then alter as generations pass. A mockingbird on Floriana and one on San Cristobal could be kin divided by sea and time. Descent with modification was ancestry made visible through divergence. After Malthus in 1838, scarcity gained its engine. I saw that nature need not choose with intention. On each island, drought, food, enemies, heat and distance pressed unevenly. Some slight beak, shell, claw, habit or endurance let its bearer live longer, mate, and leave more young. Others vanished without ceremony. Through many generations, such unequal survival and reproduction could make local forms seem designed for their own hard ground. An island is a question with water drawn around it. In the Galapagos, I could compare one shore against another, as if nature had placed her experiments in separate cabinets. San Cristobal, Floriana, Isabella, Santiago, near enough to resemble, divided enough to differ. Isolation slowed the mixing of bloodlines. It made small changes legible and turned geography into evidence. By the lamplight of later years, I must deny a tempting error. Evolution is no grand staircase climbing toward perfection. The Galapagos taught a rougher lesson. One branch divides, another withers, one form answers drought, another fails when the season turns. After 1859, readers might imagine progress where I meant descent, trial, and extinction. Life spreads like a tree in wind, not a column marching upward. What endured on one island might be ill-suited on the next. A shell useful among the dry tracts of Floriana, September 1835, might hinder where another slope demanded different reach or strength. A beak rewarded by one seed crop could prove poor against another. Thus, fitness was not a universal crown. It was a bargain struck with a particular place, hour, hunger, climate, and rival, and the bargain could change. Facts alone lay scattered like specimens in drawers. The hard labor was to imagine, without fancy, what no eye could watch. Generations passing after my October 1835 departure, small advantages accumulating before dawn, at noon, through drought and breeding season. From San Cristobal to Santiago, evidence gave the pegs, disciplined imagination stretched the cord between them. Darwinism began where observation ended, but only because observation had first held fast. A name may preserve a truth or flatten it. Darwinism, spoken after 1859, gathers years of notebooks, doubts, specimens, and other men's eyes into one convenient word. Darwin Island, far northwest and never reached by my boots in 1835, bears the same danger. The map honors influence, yet tempts the mind to invent a landing, a revelation, a single heroic instant. Legacy must be carried carefully, lest it become myth. So let the later names fall quiet for a moment. Before Darwinism, before November 24, 1859, before a northern rock carried my name, there was only a young naturalist aboard HMS Beagle. In September and October 1835, at dawn watches, noon heat and lantern hours, I moved among San Cristobal, Floriana, Isabella, and Santiago with pockets of specimens and a mind not yet equal to them. We must return to that uncertainty. Chapter 30. Finale. The island he missed. The idea he could not escape. Once more I stand the dawn watch, as on September 15, 1835, when the Galapagos first lay black upon the horizon. Then that darkness was uncertainty. Now it is crowded with witnesses, lava underfoot, shells shaped by island want, birds betraying place, and one far northern rock I never saw. The horizon has become both ledger and omission, bearing evidence, absence, and the long shadow of a name. By my reckoning, each shore answers in its own tongue. San Cristobal, September 16, gives unwary birds and lava heat. Floriana, September 23, whispers through Lawson that tortoise shells may name their island. Isabella, September 28, raises volcano after volcano, harsh enough to test every living form. Santiago, October the 1st, grants time itself, repeated watching, sharper labels, and the uneasy suspicion that place has been writing upon life. Yet the island most bound to my name gives no shell, no bird, no track in my notebook. Darwin Island, far northwest, remained beyond HMS Beagle in 1835. Its answer is a silence on the chart. I did not kneel upon its lava or label its creatures by hour and place. Still, its absence completes the chain. Discovery is shaped not only by landfall, but by the shore forever missed. Let no tidy legend make a thunderclap of it. In 1835, among those volcanic islands, I gathered clues, not a completed lore. In 1836, England reopened my boxes. In 1837, private notebooks dared the thought of transmutation. In 1838, Malthus gave pressure its terrible force. Only on November 24, 1859, did the argument stand in print. Darwinism was built slowly, shore by shore, doubt by doubt. What remained, after surf and seasickness, was ink. September 15, September 16, September 23, October 1, each date fastened to a shore, each place burdened with doubt. I had meant only to keep order among specimens and impressions. Yet those entries became timbers for a larger structure. The diary did not solve the islands. It preserved their unease until thought could return and build upon it. A name printed on a map is not a boot mark in ash. My feet knew San Cristobal's lava, Floriana's settlement paths, Isabella's black coast, Santiago's patient ground. They never knew that far northwestern rock later called Darwin Island. Thus the irony closes. The name traveled where I did not. My footsteps were limited, but the question they stirred proved less obedient than any chart. By the end, the lesson was not lodged in one beast or one beach. It lay between them, in miles of salt water, in years too vast for a diary, in hunger, drought, birth, and death. Place could divide life. Time could deepen the division. Small variations could become fates when struggle chose among them. The Galápagos had taught me that living forms are not merely placed upon the world, they are pressed by it. Astern, the Galápagos darkened into the same black horizon that had troubled my dawn watch on September 15, 1835. I looked back toward islands I had crossed, and toward one I never reached, the far rock that would later bear my name. I carried no revelation, only a question alive in the hold. If place, time, and struggle could alter life, then biology itself had begun to move.